Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday for a confirmation hearing to fill that AG role permanently. Senators confronted Blanche, President Trump's former personal attorney, on several issues, including the Epstein files and the survivors of the sexual abuse, the nearly $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund, as well as prosecuting the president's perceived political enemies.
Can I get your word under oath that within the next 30 days, you will personally sit down with these 10 victims and hear their case in terms of what needs to be done by the Department of Justice?
Chairman, I appreciate them being here today. I also have somebody from my office who's spent her entire career working on cases like Mr. Epstein's. She's in charge of our task force investigating human trafficking. She's available to talk to them.
She can sit right next to you. She can sit right next to you when you meet with these survivors.
I have never said I will not meet with survivors.
Will you meet with these 10 survivors? I'm asking you on the record.
If they have lawyers, as you know, I'm prohibited from meeting directly with them.
I believe you have said that the weaponization fund is a moot issue. Is that your position?
Yes, it is a moot issue, meaning there is no weaponization fund. The weaponization fund is dead. It's not moving forward.
Has there been a written agreement of the parties to modify the settlement fund?
No, the settlement fund's just not moving forward. There's no modification. It never started. This narrative that you won't put it in writing happens not to be true. I'm under oath today, and I've said it's dead repeatedly. I said it to the House Oversight Committee, and I'm happy to say it as many times as necessary.
Mr. Blanche, do you believe it is the president's right and duty to order the investigation or prosecution of his perceived enemies? Yes or no?
I can't answer that yes or no. That wasn't the question. And my answer was that as the president of the United States under Article 2, he's in charge of the Department of Justice. And so my answer reflects that idea.
Some key moments there, but then also a key absence, of course, because the sudden death of Senator Lindsey Graham left this committee with 11 Republicans and 10 Democrats. So Blanche will need every Republican vote for his nomination to advance to the full Senate. A possible no vote might come from one of the people you just heard from, Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He was defeated in his primary by the Trump-backed Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. In a brief interview with the New York Times after the hearing, Cornyn said, "I don't have to make a decision now, so I'm not." Congressional reporter for Axios, Kate Santilles, is here on set with me. Kate, I went into the hearing yesterday, as I'm sure you did, looking at three people who said, I have some questions to ask. It was Senator John Kennedy, Senator Thom Tillis, and Senator John Cornyn. After watching them yesterday, Kennedy came out and basically told me he's a yes, but he wouldn't say yes yet. Tillis seemed predisposed to being in the yes category. So that just kind of looks at John Cornyn. And what did you sense from what he was asking Blanche yesterday?
Well, he did really focus on this anti-weaponization fund and asked Todd Blanche some pretty pointed questions, especially coming from a Republican senator. I know leaving the hearing yesterday, he did say that he's still undecided, while we saw Tillis say that he's leaning yes. Senator John Kennedy also seemed to warm up to Todd Blanche as well. But this weaponization fund has been a problem for GOP senators beyond Senator Cornyn, too. Like Tillis said that he'd also like to codify into law something that would kill this fund. Senator Cornyn made that central to his questioning yesterday, too, and would also like to see that codified into law. Blanche did say that there are potentially some issues there that they could still use this weaponization fund in a way, but it's not totally clear yet if we're going to see Cornyn ultimately vote against Todd Blanche here. If they lose one Republican in committee, his nomination is killed. So.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I'm sort of waiting to see, and we'll find this out next week because they're not going to be able to push this out of committee until then, is there are Republicans like Tillis, like Cornyn, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, not on this committee, but eventually we'll have to vote on this on the floor, who have talked about being against this president, but they have not voted the vote or walked the walk on it yet. And so I'm wondering if this is that moment or not. And I wonder what you think as we watch the next day, technically, of witnesses talking about Blanche today. He won't be up there.
Right. I do think we're kind of seeing the effects of this YOLO caucus that President Trump has created by going after sitting senators in his own party, like Tillis, like Cassidy, and like Cornyn. They all are kind of taking up a little bit more of a stand against the Trump administration. We haven't seen a ton of effects from that yet. Legislatively, I think the biggest one is the fact that the Save America Act is a little bit stalled in the Senate right now with Tillis in opposition. But when it comes to Trump's nominees, he's really relied on just unanimous GOP support to get a lot of these people through. And when you have 3 GOP senators, that's enough to kill someone's nomination, especially just one in the Judiciary Committee. So it remains to be seen if they will ultimately vote against him. That's a really big step. Very controversial for a sitting Republican to vote against the president's nominee for such an important position.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll see what we see. I also think it's important as they continue to revive this idea of, okay, we can take the step to kill the fund in Congress. And certainly Blanche keeps bringing that up with senators. But Senator Dick Durbin put it to me this way yesterday, and I think he's right to say it. I don't get why we in Congress would have to kill something that you thought up in DOJ. You could be the one to take that step. And yet I think it's evidence of Blanche's constant paradox, which is that he can never be as forceful as some of these senators would like him to be on something that's so obviously landed with a thud on Capitol Hill and around the country, because he needs to keep Trump's confidence to keep the job.
Right. And I think that's a big theme that we saw from Democrats yesterday as well, too, pointing out the fact that Todd Blanche was President Donald Trump's personal attorney at one point. And that moment that we saw with Senator Kennedy, where he asked him, "Are you President Trump's friend?" And he responded, "No, I'm his lawyer," and then had to quickly correct and say, "I was his lawyer." I think that's going to be a moment that we're going to see a lot of Democrats point back to, talking about the importance of the independence of the Department of Justice. So remains to be seen there.
Remains to be seen. I think that is going to be the indelible line out of this hearing. It came during a questioning with Senator John Kennedy. I mean, it was a slip, clearly, but I think really points to a lot of the concerns that Democrats and some Republicans have about an attorney general who needs to be independent but has reasons in his history not to be. We were watching a few things on the Hill yesterday, so we're going to bounce to the next one, which is House Republicans releasing the framework for a $95 billion party line funding package that they hope to pass before the midterms. This was happening on the House side yesterday while the Senate was busy with hearings. And it's the latest effort by party leaders to use the budget reconciliation process to muscle through key Republican priorities while they control both chambers of Congress. The framework includes up to $73 billion for defense and intelligence efforts, $12 billion for farm assistance, and another $10 billion for election-related matters. The House Budget Committee is scheduled to mark up the resolution today. Fiscal hawks are already voicing concern about a lack of spending cuts to offset the new funding proposals. And I think the clearest way to put this is they've got problems and they haven't even started yet.
Right. That's exactly right. Speaker Mike Johnson does not have the votes to pass this right now, and they haven't even passed a budget resolution or marked it up in committee. The committee is going to mark it up today, and we'll see if they can get that through. But we know that there are a couple members on the committee that are signaling they might not vote for this, like Congressman Chip Roy, who's really concerned about the lack of spending cuts in this. Then we also have Congresswoman Erin Houchin, who wasn't included in these Camp David negotiations over the weekend. She's really upset about being left out of that process and is signaling that she just has reservations about the whole thing in general. So if this even gets through committee, once we get to the House floor, we're going to have a lot of issues there. Conservatives are saying that, one, the Save America Act part of this is not going far enough. They can't put the full bill in there. It would have to be some sort of grant program to pass the reconciliation rules in the Senate. And they're saying they want the full Save America Act, or they're not going to be okay with this, a few of them at least. Some people say something's better than nothing, but at the same time, there's just a lot of different coalitions here who are split on different parts of this, want to see more defense spending, want to see less defense spending. So they just have to find consensus, and they don't have a lot of time. So.
Not a lot of time, not a lot of vote margin to play with. And also, that's you just talking about the House. On the Senate side, we're already seeing the next budget chair, because, of course, Lindsey Graham, that was his job. Now, the next budget chair, Senator Ron Johnson, saying, OK, this idea of not having offsets, not having pay-fors is going to be a huge problem. And that's not something they have a ton of time to work through. It's going to be a bit messy. Congressional reporter for Axios, Kate Santelise, I know you're going to be all over it. Thank you. There was one more hearing on the Hill yesterday that we want to put on your radar. Jay Clayton, President Trump's nominee for Director of National Intelligence, faced sharp questions from Senate Democrats yesterday over election security and the 2020 election results.
Do you deny that Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
Senator, I'm not an election denier. Joe Biden was certified as the president of the United States.
We've tried umpteen different ways to gift you the ability to just acknowledge that Joe Biden was the president. It was fairly and duly elected.
I've acknowledged, Senator, that Joe Biden was the president. I've acknowledged that.
And fairly and duly elected.
And fairly and duly elected under our process.
Who won the 2020 election?
I'm not going to do this with you.
This is a job interview. We've established that you have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the committee. Yes, you do have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the committee?
Yes.
Who won the 2020 election?
Like I said, I'm not going to get into that with you.
But you do have an obligation to be honest and forthright with the committee.
Is anything that I just said not honest or forthright?
Yes, you're not being honest or forthright. Who won the 2020 election?
I think I've answered the question. We can keep doing this.
Well, we're going to keep doing it because you're not being honest and forthright.
I'm not going to engage in the theater.
Neither will we, because we're going to note again that extensive intelligence reviews under both the Trump and Biden administrations found no basis for claims that the 2020 election was stolen. Clayton argues U.S. elections need stronger cybersecurity and said substantial work is required to improve the process. And if confirmed, his nomination could reopen negotiations over renewing the government's surveillance authority, which has expired after being blocked by Democrats in protest of acting DNI Bill Pulte's appointment to the DNI role. And look, Clayton, I think yesterday is probably still on a glide path to confirmation, but you can't help but argue that the answers, some of which you saw there, made it harder for Democrats who might have been inclined to vote yes, in large part because he's not Bill Pulte and actually has some level of experience for the job that he's being appointed to, that it made it harder for them to do that, even though it seemed like that's where they were going.